Sometimes the moon does not demand a life because it is cruel. Sometimes it asks one heart to reveal the truth everyone else refused to see. The blood moon rose slowly above the ancient towers of Ashen Crown Palace, bathing every stone wall in a crimson glow that made the entire kingdom seem suspended between hope and despair. Thousands of wolves filled the royal courtyard without speaking, their silver eyes fixed upon the sacred circle carved into the marble centuries before. Candles flickered around its edge, their tiny flames trembling beneath the cold autumn wind as elders in white ceremonial robes whispered prayers that had failed for generations. At the center of the circle stood Alpha King Ethan Ashford. His black ceremonial coat hung heavily across broad shoulders that had carried the weight of an entire kingdom for years. His pale skin reflected the eerie moonlight, while faint silver markings shimmered beneath the surface of his hands, reminders of the ancient moon curse that no healer, no scholar, and no sacred ritual had ever been able to erase. Every blood moon drew the curse deeper into his soul, stealing another piece of the peaceful man he once had been. Across the courtyard, another pair of footsteps echoed softly against the stone. Claire Bennett walked forward between two royal attendants, wearing nothing more than a simple ivory linen dress that contrasted sharply against the dark surroundings. Her white skin glowed beneath the crimson sky, and loose strands of her ash-blonde hair drifted gently around her calm blue eyes. She did not struggle. She did not plead. She accepted each step with quiet dignity, even while whispers followed her through the crowd. Rejected Omega, unwanted daughter, worthless sacrifice. Those cruel titles had accompanied her for so many years that they no longer reached her heart. The elders believed they had chosen the easiest life to surrender because they assumed no one would mourn an Omega abandoned by nearly everyone she had ever known. They never imagined that the quiet young woman walking toward the sacred circle carried more courage than every voice judging her from the shadows. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes as Claire approached. Until that moment, she had been little more than a name written across official reports prepared by the council. Now he saw a frightened kingdom expecting one stranger to carry a burden that had never belonged to her. His jaw tightened. The silence stretching between them felt heavier than the mountain surrounding the castle itself. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough that only Claire could hear. "I never asked anyone to die for me." Claire looked directly into his silver eyes. There was fear inside her heart, but remarkably little bitterness. A faint smile touched her lips before she answered with gentle honesty. "Neither did I, but perhaps we were both chosen for something neither of us understands yet." Ethan searched her face, expecting desperation or resentment, yet found only compassion that made his own certainty begin to weaken. Around them, the elders continued preparing the ancient ceremony, convinced history was about to repeat itself once again. None of them noticed the small moon-shaped pendant resting beneath Claire's dress, beginning to emit the faintest silver glow. The light was so subtle that only the blood moon seemed to recognize it, reflecting across the polished marble in delicate threads that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Somewhere deep beneath the palace, ancient stones responded with an almost imperceptible vibration, as though an old promise long forgotten had quietly awakened after centuries of waiting. While the kingdom believed it was witnessing the beginning of one more tragic sacrifice, destiny had already begun rewriting every rule they thought they understood. 7 days earlier, before the blood moon painted the sky red and before the kingdom whispered that one forgotten Omega would become the answer to an impossible curse, Claire Bennett lived where almost no one cared to look. Her small cottage rested at the edge of Ashen Hollow, nearly 3 miles beyond the last stone house of the village, surrounded by tall pine trees and wildflowers that bloomed without asking permission from anyone. The roof leaked whenever heavy rain arrived, the wooden fence leaned with age, and the tiny herb garden behind the cottage was far more valuable than anything inside the house. Every morning before sunrise, Claire gathered fresh lavender, moonleaf, and silver thyme into a woven basket before walking the narrow forest paths toward the village. Children always recognized her first. They ran to greet her with bright smiles because they remembered the warm herbal tea she prepared during winter fevers and the gentle stories she told whenever fear became stronger than pain. Their parents thanked her politely when no one else was watching, yet many still avoided standing beside her in public. To them she remained the rejected Omega, whose presence carried quiet embarrassment rather than honor. Claire never argued. She understood that kindness given only in exchange for acceptance was not kindness at all. An elderly widow struggling to carry firewood always discovered neatly stacked bundles outside her door before sunset. A wounded deer found trapped between fallen branches somehow returned to the forest healthy a few days later. Even abandoned wolf pups occasionally appeared outside Claire's cottage and always left stronger than before. No one ever saw her asking for praise, and no one could remember her refusing someone in need. Around her neck rested a small moon-shaped pendant carved from pale crystal. She had worn it for as long as she could remember. The old woman who raised her before passing away had once whispered that it should never leave her heart, even if she never understood why. Claire had asked countless questions over the years, but no answers ever came. The pendant remained cold almost every day, no different from ordinary stone, and eventually she stopped expecting it to mean anything at all. Late that afternoon, while returning from the village with an empty basket, she noticed an exhausted traveler resting beneath a large oak tree beside the road. His clothes were dusty from weeks of travel, and concern filled his tired eyes more than fatigue. Claire quietly offered him fresh water and half of the bread she had planned to save for dinner. The traveler accepted with grateful surprise. "Why help a stranger when you have so little yourself?" he asked. Claire smiled gently. "Because someone once helped me when I had even less." He studied her for a long moment before glancing toward the pale pendant around her neck. For an instant his expression changed, almost as though he recognized something impossible. Before Claire could ask what troubled him, distant church bells echoed across the valley. Royal messengers rode through the village square carrying black banners marked with a silver crescent moon. Every voice fell silent as the announcement spread from house to house. The blood moon would rise in 7 days. The Alpha King's curse had reached its final stage. Every healer, scholar, elder, and gifted soul within the kingdom was ordered to report to Ashen Crown Palace before the next sunset. The traveler slowly stood, his eyes lingering once more on Claire's pendant before quietly saying, "Some journeys begin long before we realize we have already been chosen." Then he disappeared down the forest path, leaving Claire standing beneath the fading sunlight with a strange feeling that the peaceful life she had known was about to vanish forever. The announcement reached every corner of the kingdom before sunset, and by the following morning the roads leading to Ashen Crown Palace were filled with healers, scholars, priests, and gifted wolves answering the royal summons. Claire watched them pass from the edge of the village while quietly watering the herbs behind her cottage. She had never imagined that someone like her would receive such an invitation, and she certainly did not expect the palace to remember the existence of a rejected Omega. Life had taught her that the powerful rarely noticed people living in forgotten places. Far beyond the village, Ethan Ashford stood alone on the highest balcony of the royal palace as gray clouds drifted across the sky. From that height, he could see nearly the entire capital stretching toward the distant forests, yet the view brought him no comfort. Every year the moon curse grew stronger. Every year another attempt failed. The silver markings spreading across his hands had begun climbing toward his arms, glowing faintly whenever the evening air grew colder. Royal physicians recorded every change with careful precision, but their notes always ended the same way. No known treatment had slowed the curse. No ancient blessing had weakened it. No healer had discovered its source. Ethan closed the heavy journal resting upon the stone railing. Inside were decades of reports written by generations of advisors, each promising hope before ending with disappointment. He had stopped counting how many experts had walked through the palace gates believing they possessed the answer. None had succeeded. Even so, he continued welcoming every new arrival because surrendering would mean abandoning the kingdom that depended upon him. Later that afternoon, the Council of Elders gathered inside the Hall of Moons. Long banners embroidered with silver crescents hung between towering marble columns, while dozens of candles illuminated shelves filled with ancient scrolls. Elder Marcus stepped forward carrying a weathered manuscript whose pages had nearly crumbled with age. He spoke with absolute certainty. "Your Majesty, every prophecy points toward the same conclusion. Before the next blood moon reaches its highest point, a final sacred ritual must take place. If it fails, The curse may become permanent. Ethan remained silent for several moments before asking the question no one wished to answer. And what will this ritual require? The council exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Elder Marcus lowered his eyes. A willing soul must stand beside the Alpha King inside the moon circle. History suggests that person may not survive the ceremony. The words settled across the chamber like winter frost. Ethan's expression hardened, but there was no anger in his voice. Only exhaustion. Then history has already asked too much. Yet the council insisted there was no other path. They believed saving the kingdom justified every sacrifice. Quietly, without Ethan's knowledge, they began searching through village records, healer registries, and forgotten family histories, looking for someone whose absence would create the fewest questions. Days passed as names were crossed away one after another until a single file remained upon the council table. Claire Bennett. Rejected. Omega. No surviving family. No official mate. No noble protector. To the council, she appeared to be the simplest choice. They never investigated why every child in Ashen Hollow smiled when speaking her name, why every elderly neighbor quietly prayed for her happiness, or why complete strangers somehow trusted her after only a single conversation. Hidden beneath ordinary acts of kindness was a truth no official document had ever measured, and while the council believed they had selected the least important life in the kingdom, destiny had already begun arranging a far different ending. The royal summons arrived at Claire Bennett's cottage just after sunrise, carried by two palace attendants dressed in dark blue cloaks embroidered with the silver crest of Ashen Crown. They spoke with perfect courtesy, yet neither of them met her eyes for very long. One carefully unfolded a scroll sealed with the royal emblem before reading the council's order aloud. Claire was requested to appear before the Council of Elders before sunset on the following day. No explanation followed. No reason was offered. Only a signature bearing the authority of the kingdom itself. After the attendants departed, the quiet forest seemed strangely different. Even the birds had fallen silent, as if they sensed the weight hidden inside a few carefully chosen words. Claire stood alone outside her cottage, her fingers resting unconsciously against the moon-shaped pendant beneath her dress. It felt slightly warmer than usual, but she dismissed the sensation as nothing more than nervous imagination. She packed only a small leather satchel with fresh herbs, a spare dress, and the worn journal that had belonged to the elderly woman who had raised her. Before leaving, she watered every flower in her little garden one last time, whispering softly that she would return soon, although she could not explain why those simple words suddenly felt uncertain. The journey to Ashen Crown Palace covered nearly 12 miles through towering forests and winding stone roads. Villagers watched quietly as she passed. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others simply looked away. News traveled quickly, and everyone knew the palace was gathering gifted souls before the coming blood moon. By late afternoon, the enormous gates of the capital stood before her, their polished silver emblems shining beneath the fading sunlight. Claire had never entered the royal city before. Marble streets stretched toward elegant towers while fountains reflected golden light across carefully trimmed gardens. Everything appeared magnificent, yet beneath the beauty, she sensed an invisible layer of fear. Guards stood at nearly every corner. Conversations became whispers whenever the Alpha King was mentioned. Hope had grown fragile throughout the kingdom. Inside the Hall of Moons, Elder Marcus greeted her with practiced politeness. Several council members observed silently from behind a long stone table covered with ancient scrolls. Claire answered every question honestly. She spoke of her life in Ashen Hollow, of healing herbs, of caring for injured animals, and of the old woman who had raised her. No one asked about her dreams. No one asked whether she wished to remain in the village. Instead, they studied records, exchanged quiet glances, and occasionally looked toward the small pendant resting against her chest. Finally, Elder Marcus folded his hands. Claire Bennett, the kingdom requires your help. She listened without interrupting. An ancient ritual will be performed during the blood moon. You have been selected to stand beside His Majesty. Claire waited for him to continue. A long silence settled across the chamber before another elder finally spoke the words everyone else hesitated to say. There is no certainty regarding the outcome. She understood immediately. They were asking for more than her presence. They were asking her to accept a future that no one could promise she would return from. Her heartbeat quickened, yet fear did not control her. Instead, she thought about the frightened children she had comforted, the lonely widow who waited each winter for firewood outside her door, and the countless ordinary people who believed the Alpha King carried their burdens every single day. Claire lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking back at the council with quiet resolve. If there truly is a chance to save the kingdom, then I will stand where you ask me to stand. None of the elders noticed that the crystal pendant beneath her dress emitted another faint pulse of silver light, brighter than before, as though something ancient had quietly accepted the promise she had just made. That evening, Claire was escorted to a quiet guest chamber overlooking the eastern gardens of Ashen Crown Palace, a room far grander than anything she had ever known, yet it felt strangely empty. The soft bed, polished furniture, and glowing fireplace offered comfort, but her thoughts remained fixed on the uncertain days ahead. Outside the tall windows, servants hurried through the palace carrying bundles of candles, ceremonial robes, and ancient scrolls as preparations for the coming blood moon continued without pause. Sleep refused to come, so Claire slipped into the silent corridors carrying only the old journal that had belonged to the woman who had raised her. She wandered carefully until she reached a small courtyard where moonflowers bloomed beneath a crystal fountain. Their pale petals reflected the stars with quiet beauty. As she knelt to admire them, an elderly man emerged from the shadows wearing the simple gray robes of the royal archives rather than the elegant garments of the council. His silver hair rested neatly upon his shoulders, and despite his age, his blue eyes remained remarkably bright. Those flowers only open for those who still believe hope can grow in darkness, he said with a gentle smile. Claire stood respectfully. I did not mean to disturb anyone. The old man shook his head. You are disturbing nothing. In fact, I have been hoping to meet you. He introduced himself as Professor Edwin Holloway, the oldest royal historian still serving within the palace. Unlike the council, he spoke to Claire as though she were an honored guest instead of a forgotten Omega. Their conversation drifted naturally from healing herbs to forgotten legends until his attention settled upon the moon-shaped pendant resting against her dress. His expression quietly changed. May I ask where you found that pendant? Claire explained that she had worn it since childhood, because the woman who raised her insisted it should never leave her. Edwin became unusually silent before inviting her to follow him into the royal archives. Thousands of books and scrolls filled towering shelves stretching almost to the ceiling. Dust floated through golden candlelight while the scent of old parchment lingered in the air. Edwin disappeared among the shelves and eventually returned carrying an enormous leather-bound manuscript whose faded cover displayed the same crescent moon engraved upon Claire's pendant. Carefully opening the fragile pages, he revealed an illustration unlike anything Claire had ever seen. It showed an Alpha King standing beside a young woman wearing an identical moon-shaped pendant while silver light surrounded them both beneath a blood moon. Claire stared at the image in disbelief. Edwin slowly traced several ancient lines written beneath the painting. For decades, the council has interpreted this prophecy as demanding a sacrifice, he whispered. But I have always believed they misunderstood its meaning. He continued turning brittle pages until he found a damaged section where much of the writing had faded with time. Only a few sentences remained readable. They spoke not of death, but of willingness, compassion, and a forgotten bloodline known as Moonlight Blood. Edwin looked toward Claire with growing concern. The ritual may never have required someone to be lost. It may have required someone carrying this blessing to choose the path freely. Before Claire could ask another question, hurried footsteps echoed through the archive hallway. Edwin quickly closed the manuscript and returned it to the shelf. Two council attendants appeared in the doorway announcing that the chamber would be sealed until after the ceremony. As they escorted Claire away, neither she nor Edwin noticed that the ancient illustration had begun glowing faintly inside the closed book, while the crystal pendant resting over Claire's heart answered with the same quiet silver light, as though two pieces of a forgotten promise had finally found each other again. The night before the blood moon arrived, an uneasy silence settled over Ashen Crown Palace. Servants moved quietly through the grand halls, speaking only in whispers as though raising their voices might awaken the ancient curse itself. Claire Bennett stood beside the window of her chamber watching pale clouds drift across the stars. The crystal pendant resting above her heart had remained warm ever since leaving the royal archives, and although she still could not explain why, she no longer believed it was an ordinary keepsake. Somewhere inside the palace, forgotten answers were waiting. At the opposite end of the castle, Ethan Ashford sat alone inside the Hall of Kings. Portraits of his ancestors lined the towering walls, each alpha who had ruled before him wearing expressions of confidence and strength. Ethan wondered how many of them had carried fears they never allowed the world to see. His hands rested upon the carved wooden table, while the silver markings beneath his skin glowed brighter than ever before. He closed his eyes, remembering every healer who had promised hope, every ceremony that had ended in disappointment, and every loyal subject who continued believing in a king who increasingly questioned himself. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Professor Edwin Holloway entered carrying several weathered scrolls tucked beneath one arm. "Your Majesty, I believe the council has overlooked something important." Ethan immediately recognized the seriousness in the historian's voice and invited him closer. Edwin carefully unrolled the oldest parchment across the table. Ancient symbols covered the faded surface, surrounding a familiar crescent moon identical to the emblem Claire wore around her neck. For generations, these writings have been translated as instructions for a sacrifice, Edwin explained. But I compared them with older dialects preserved in the Eastern libraries. One word has been misunderstood for centuries. Ethan leaned forward. "Which word?" Edwin pointed toward the center of the page. "The original meaning was never sacrifice. It was offering. There is a profound difference. A sacrifice is something taken. An offering is something freely given." The room fell completely silent. Ethan stared at the ancient text as countless pieces suddenly began fitting together. Then every ritual before this one, Edwin nodded slowly, may have been built upon a mistranslation. Before either man could speak again, another realization struck the elderly historian. He reached into his satchel and removed a smaller journal filled with family records gathered over decades. One page contained a faded drawing of the same moon-shaped pendant Claire carried every day. Beside it appeared a single family name that had nearly vanished from history. Moonlight Blood. Edwin's hands trembled slightly. "Your Majesty, I believe Claire Bennett belongs to the last surviving branch of this forgotten lineage." Ethan remained motionless, unable to look away from the page. The rejected Omega chosen because everyone believed her life mattered least was, in truth, connected to the very prophecy the kingdom had searched for across generations. Yet another question lingered in his mind. Does she know? Edwin quietly shook his head. "I do not believe so." At that exact moment, across the palace grounds, Claire stepped onto the moonlit balcony outside her chamber. A cool breeze lifted strands of her ash-blonde hair while she gazed toward the glowing horizon. The pendant suddenly released a soft silver light that spread gently across her hands instead of burning or frightening her. At the same instant, deep beneath the palace, hidden symbols carved into forgotten stone chambers awakened one by one, illuminating passages untouched for centuries. Neither Claire nor Ethan witnessed the ancient halls coming alive beneath their feet, but both felt the same unexpected sensation within their hearts. For the first time since the curse had begun, fear no longer seemed stronger than hope, and destiny quietly prepared to reveal that compassion, freely chosen, possessed a power no ancient curse had ever anticipated. Morning arrived beneath a sky covered with heavy silver clouds, and every bell throughout Ashen Crown rang slowly as the kingdom prepared for the ceremony that would begin after sunset. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates in respectful silence, each person carrying a different hope, yet sharing the same fear. Inside the Hall of Moons, the Council of Elders completed the final arrangements around the ancient marble circle while dozens of candles cast long shadows across the polished floor. Claire Bennett entered wearing the same simple ivory dress she had chosen herself, refusing the elaborate ceremonial robes the palace attendants had offered. She believed that if this day truly mattered, she should face it as the woman she had always been rather than hide beneath borrowed grandeur. Her crystal pendant rested quietly above her heart, its gentle warmth now feeling almost comforting. Across the chamber, Ethan Ashford watched her arrive. For the first time in many years, he found his attention drawn away from the curse and toward the quiet courage standing only a few steps away. She did not resemble the legends describing warriors destined to change history. She looked like an ordinary young woman carrying extraordinary peace. That realization unsettled him more than any prophecy ever had. Before the elders could begin their formal preparations, Professor Edwin Holloway entered the chamber carrying the ancient manuscript recovered from the royal archives. His usually calm expression revealed unmistakable urgency. "Your Majesty, the council must hear this before the ritual begins." Elder Marcus frowned. "There is no more time for scholarly debate." Edwin placed the manuscript upon the ceremonial table and carefully opened the restored pages. "This is no debate. It is the missing portion of the prophecy." The room grew silent as faded silver letters shimmered beneath the candlelight. Edwin read slowly from the ancient text. "The moon shall answer not to fear, nor to power, nor to blood unwillingly given. Only the heart that freely offers light shall awaken the sleeping promise." Every elder exchanged uncertain glances. Those words differed completely from the teachings passed down for generations. Elder Marcus stepped forward, his voice tense with disbelief. "These passages have never appeared in the official records." Edwin nodded. "Because they were hidden within damaged translations. The original language survived only inside forgotten archive copies." Ethan looked toward Claire, remembering every word the historian had spoken the previous evening. Suddenly, the entire ceremony appeared built upon centuries of misunderstanding. Claire remained quietly composed despite feeling every pair of eyes turned toward her. She had never asked to become the center of an ancient prophecy, yet she also sensed that turning away now would only leave the kingdom imprisoned by fear. Before anyone else could speak, the crystal pendant resting against her chest released a clear silver glow visible to everyone inside the chamber. Gentle light spread across the marble floor, tracing forgotten symbols hidden beneath the stone itself. Gasps echoed throughout the hall as lines that had remained invisible for centuries slowly formed a perfect circle around Claire and Ethan. No fire appeared. No destruction followed. Only peaceful light filled the chamber, carrying with it a warmth unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed during previous ceremonies. Ethan instinctively stepped closer to Claire rather than away from her. As their eyes met, the silver markings upon his hands softened for the first time since the curse had begun years earlier. The change lasted only a few seconds before fading once again, but everyone had seen it happen. The curse had responded, not to fear, not to ritual, but simply to her presence. In that quiet moment, the certainty that had guided the council for generations began to crumble, and while many still clung to old traditions, Ethan understood with growing clarity that protecting Claire had become just as important as saving the kingdom itself. As sunset approached, the first crimson rays of the blood moon stretched across the palace towers, and every candle surrounding the ancient moon's circle ignited as though guided by an unseen hand. The Hall of Moons fell completely silent. No one dared move as Claire Bennett and Ethan Ashford stepped into the center of the glowing symbols together. The silver lines beneath the marble brightened immediately, forming graceful patterns that had remained hidden for centuries. Elder Marcus raised his ceremonial staff, determined to continue the ritual exactly as tradition demanded despite everything Professor Edwin Holloway had revealed. "The ceremony must proceed," he declared. "The kingdom cannot risk abandoning the only path history has preserved." Before the elders could continue their ancient recitations, Ethan slowly raised his hand. His calm voice echoed through the vast chamber with unmistakable authority. "No." The single word seemed to stop time itself. Every eye turned toward the Alpha King. "If our ancestors misunderstood these writings," Ethan continued, "then I will not allow another life to be placed upon an altar built from a mistake." Several elders protested immediately, insisting that changing the ritual at the final moment endangered the entire kingdom. Fear spread through the chamber as centuries of unquestioned tradition collided with newly discovered truth. Claire listened quietly, her heart beating steadily despite the growing tension around her. She stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I came here by my own choice." Ethan met her gentle blue eyes. "Choosing to help is not the same as allowing others to decide your worth." Those words silenced even the loudest voices in the room. For perhaps the first time in her life, someone with power was protecting her not because of what she might accomplish, but simply because her life mattered. Claire felt warmth rise behind her eyes, yet she remained composed. She slowly reached for the moon-shaped pendant resting above her heart and held it gently in both hands. Professor Holloway said the prophecy speaks of an offering freely given, she whispered. Then let it truly be freely given. Not because anyone expects it, not because anyone demands it, because hope deserves to be chosen. As the final words left her lips, the pendant released a brilliant, yet gentle silver radiance that spread through the moon's circle like flowing water. The ancient symbols beneath the marble awakened completely, extending outward until they surrounded both Claire and Ethan in a perfect circle of shimmering light. Instead of pain or fear, an overwhelming sense of peace filled the chamber. The silver markings beneath Ethan's skin began fading little by little, dissolving like frost beneath the first warmth of spring. He looked down at his hands in stunned silence before lifting his eyes toward Claire. Neither of them had spoken another word, yet they both understood something extraordinary was happening. The curse was not surrendering to force. It was responding to trust freely shared between two hearts that had both carried loneliness in different ways. Around them, members of the council slowly lowered their ceremonial staffs. The expressions that had once reflected certainty now carried humility instead. Professor Edwin smiled quietly, recognizing that the forgotten prophecy had finally been understood exactly as it had always been intended. Above the palace, the crimson glow of the blood moon gradually softened into a luminous silver, and for the first time in living memory, the sky itself seemed to welcome the kingdom with quiet reassurance rather than fear. Ethan took one respectful step toward Claire, not as a king commanding a subject, but as one soul offering gratitude to another, while everyone watching realized that true strength had never been found in sacrifice, but in the courage to choose compassion when tradition demanded otherwise. The silver light slowly faded from the Hall of Moons, leaving behind a peaceful stillness unlike anything the kingdom had experienced in generations. For several long moments, no one spoke. The ancient symbols carved into the marble floor remained softly illuminated before gradually disappearing beneath the stone once more, as though they had completed the purpose they had patiently guarded for centuries. Ethan Ashford lowered his eyes to his hands. The silver markings that had followed him through years of loneliness were gone. Only clear skin remained beneath the gentle glow of the moonlight. He closed his fingers slowly, almost afraid the moment might disappear like a dream, but nothing changed. The burden he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. A quiet breath escaped his lips, one he had not realized he had been holding for years. Around the chamber, members of the Council of Elders looked at one another with humbled expressions. Their certainty had been replaced by understanding. Elder Marcus stepped forward first, lowering his ceremonial staff before Claire Bennett. "We believed we were protecting the kingdom," he said softly. "Instead, we allowed fear to become stronger than truth. For that, we owe you our deepest apology." Claire answered with the same quiet kindness that had guided her throughout her life. "The kingdom does not need my anger. It needs a future that remembers what happened today." Her gentle words carried no bitterness, only hope, and they touched every heart within the chamber more deeply than any accusation could have. Professor Edwin Holloway smiled as he carefully closed the ancient manuscript. "The prophecy was never about ending a curse," he said. "It was about reminding every generation that compassion accomplishes what fear never can." The great palace doors slowly opened, allowing the waiting citizens to witness their Alpha King walking into the moonlight beside the young Omega they had once overlooked. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd before giving way to warm applause that echoed across the palace courtyard. People who had never spoken Claire's name before now looked upon her with gratitude instead of judgment. Children smiled as they recognized the gentle healer from Ashen Hollow, and several elderly villagers wiped away grateful tears, knowing the young woman they had always admired had finally received the respect she deserved. Ethan stopped at the top of the palace steps and turned toward Claire. Before the entire kingdom, he removed the silver cloak that marked his royal authority and gently placed it across her shoulders, not to elevate her above others, but to honor the courage she had shown when no one believed in her. "You came here believing you would stand alone," he said quietly. "From this day forward, you never will." Claire looked across the kingdom stretching beyond the palace walls, remembering the lonely cottage, the wildflowers, the frightened children, and every ordinary act of kindness that had quietly led her to this extraordinary moment. She realized none of those small choices had ever been wasted. They had been preparing her heart all along. As the first light of dawn appeared beyond the distant mountains, the blood moon finally disappeared beyond the horizon, replaced by a clear golden sunrise that bathed the kingdom in warmth. Fresh flowers opened across the palace gardens, birds filled the morning air with cheerful songs, and the cool breeze carried away the final shadow of the ancient curse. Hand in hand, not as ruler and sacrifice, but as two souls forever changed by compassion, Ethan and Claire stepped forward together into a future neither prophecy nor tradition had fully imagined, proving that true strength is found not in power, not in fear, and never in the life someone is willing to surrender, but in the quiet courage to see the worth of another person long before the rest of the world finally learns to do the same. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.